It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce Shulamit Werner, and your maiden name was Lilienfeld, and you were born in Austria, in Vienna, and we in your beautiful home here in Kiryat Ono in Israel. And Shulamit, if you could mention just a little bit about your background, your parents, and growing up in Vienna before the war.
Well, I hardly had a chance to grow up there. I left the day after I turned 6. So I didn't grow up there.
But
really.
do you remember? Do you still remember?
I remember quite a bit. Excuse me, I have to wipe my nose. So my father was born in a little shtetl in Galicia, what was then Galicia, called Zaleschiki. He was what they called an Ilui, and he was
a genius. He was a genius.
A genius in Jewish studies, and he went to a high yeshiva. And at the age of 19, he like many other Jews during the Haskalah, came to the big city, Vienna. And there he studied in the rabbinical college seminar, and he got a smicha l'rabbanut. And he also went to the university and got a doctorate in Jewish history. And he is a Yorei Adin. I'll show you the document later. It's framed. That was my father, and he met my mother, I don't know how and where, probably at some Zionist youth meeting. My mother was born in Bologov, but as a very young child, she came to Vienna with her parents and her brother and her sister. The father, my grandfather, was an industrialist and a very rich man. And my father married a rich lady, and he could afford to spend his life, his time, studying whatever he felt like studying, and discussing Zionism, and sitting in the Vienna's cafe and having arguments with his fellow Zionists. And this is how he spent his time till the Anschluss. And the Anschluss was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, March 38. And he was immediately, people knew about him because he had the Zionist background. He worked for the Palästina Amt, which is the Palestine office, and anything to do with Zionism and Palestine went through that office. And immediately after March 38, he was packed into prison, into Dachau. Dachau at that time wasn't a death camp. At that time it was a prison. And he spent a few months there, and mother was alone, and things went from bad to worse from day to day. And my mother said, I still can remember her voice, "Die Kinder müssen raus." The children have to leave. The children have to leave. And as she was so well connected, she managed to get us onto the Vienna Kindertransport. And I remember the night we left, I remember the railway station, and my father was released on that night, and he came to say goodbye. And I was 2 days after my 6th birthday, and I couldn't understand what was going on. I'd been told that we are going to go by train, and we are going to cross the sea in a ferry. I didn't know what a ferry was. I had never seen the sea. And the best thing about it, the best part was that it was to be without parents. And I was a tomboy, and I thought, wow, what a delight. We are going to have a wonderful time, because the parents won't be there to tell us don't do this and don't do that. Wonderful. And everybody was crying. The children were crying, and the parents were crying, and they were embracing each other, and I couldn't understand what was going on. Here we are embarking on this adventure, and everybody's crying. And we got on the train, my sister and I. My mother said to my sister, take care of your young girls. Sister, which she did till the day she died, told me what to do, and off we went. And I remember we arrived in Holland, and on the train there was this man with his only daughter, and he had smuggled himself onto the train, which was forbidden, of course, because the British government had allowed 10,000 Jewish children to come to Israel, but they had their tnaim. How do you say tnaim?
Conditions.
They set their own conditions. The government wouldn't be involved financially in any part of this mission, and the children would come without their parents.
This is to bring to England?
To England, without their parents. And those were the conditions. And here was this man who couldn't separate himself from his daughter.
Shulamit, can I just ask you, when you were at the train station with your sister and you saw your father now, you hadn't seen him for a while, was it very emotional for you to say goodbye to your parents?
No, I really don't understand that. I probably didn't get it. I thought we are going to have this marvelous adventure.
Did you have friends?
No, just my sister.
And when you left your home, you didn't know that you were going to be leaving?
Yes, Mother said that they'll come and fetch us. We are going to a different country. We'll learn English, and they'll come and fetch us. Don't worry, we'll come and fetch you. And I didn't worry. My sister, who was 5 years older, she had more of an understanding of what was going on. But
do you remember the date when you went?
I think it was the end of November 38. 38. It was 38. It's either November or the beginning of December 38.
And Shulamit, can I ask, do you remember in Vienna any anti-Jewish...
Oh yes. That I remember. I remember Jews scrubbing the streets with brushes.
You remember
on
that?
their
You saw
knees.
that?
I saw that. I remember that. I remember my parents were distressed, very, very distressed and nervous all the time. And Mother was very busy preparing our departure. But
And you had grandparents?
no, my grandparents were... My father's parents, I never saw them again after the age of 3. I don't know what happened to them. And my Viennese grandparents, the parents of my mother, weren't alive anymore at that stage, both of them.
And Shulamit, can I ask, were you in a... Okay, you were only 6, but were you in a nursery school?
No, November. I must have gone to school perhaps, no, nursery school wasn't the mode. You stayed at home with your mother, and when you were ready for school, you went to school. I don't remember nursery school at all. I don't think I went to nursery school.
And did you feel going outside there was a tension?
No fear, no tension, an adventure. An adventure. I can't understand it till today. We arrived in Holland, and here were these women with thermoses and hot chocolate. And we drank the hot chocolate. It was November. It's cold. And the people were so nice and wonderful. And I wanted to tell you about that man with his daughter. He accompanied his daughter till we arrived in Rotterdam, where we were supposed to take the ferry. And the people on the train said, "You can't go on the ferry with her. You're not allowed. Parents are not allowed on the ferry." And he took his daughter back on the train, and both of them didn't survive. And that's a terrible story which I can't forget. And the story of that man, I think I heard the details after I'd arrived in Israel, when I was already older. And that made me think that I never really thought what it was like for those parents to send their children, as that book says, into the arms of strangers. You send them away and you don't know what's going to happen to them. They must have been heroes, those parents. And then when we reunited here, I never asked my mother, and as I said, she never told us of her own volition what it must have been for her, what it must have felt like to send 2 little girls into the unknown.
And you remember from Rotterdam, you're right, it must have been so hard, and it's one of the hardest decisions a parent can ever make.
But they made the right decision, because the children were saved, and not all the parents.
You remember?
Some were saved, and some were not. I was very lucky. I arrived at the house of a Jewish family. There are details where first we arrived in a summer camp which was deserted.
But can I ask you, were you in Rotterdam, And then you took the ferry in Rotterdam?
Yes.
Do you remember going onto the ferry?
Yes, we got onto the ferry and it was lovely. The sea was rough. I still remember the sea.
It's the first time you've been on the sea?
First time I'd been.
Were you
on
not
the
nervous going on this ferry?
No.
Shulamit, do you think it helped that you had your sister with you? That could have helped you, that it was less traumatic? That you weren't alone?
I wanted to get rid of her. She was a nudnik. I was a very independent little girl.
At 6?
Yes. I wanted to do it all on my own, and I had fun. And then when we arrived, I think it was Harwich, which is a port on southeastern coast of England, and that's where we arrived.
Who met you? Do you remember when you arrived?
We had counselors with us, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. The older children took care of the groups of younger children. That the British government allowed. And they accompanied us, and I don't know who received us and who took us in, but I remember when we were put up in a summer camp, which was deserted in November. But there in the camp, they had a dining hall, and they had cabins. And my sister and myself were in one little cabin, and every 2 children had a different cabin, and we met 3 times a day for meals in the dining room. There was a big bell, and we were called to have our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there I was introduced to English cooking, which is terrible. You know, my mother was... memories you have through your senses. It's not always through sight that you remember. Sometimes it's through smells and taste. And I remember, my mother was a wonderful cook, that I had to eat this boiled cabbage, which tastes like nothing. And they had boiled cabbage, and then they had this gray stuff, sticky stuff, which went plump onto your plate, and that was porridge made of Quaker oats. Now, I'd never seen Quaker oats. Yeah, and it tasted like glue. But and I didn't eat. And my sister gave me hell. And then came along the instructor and said, "You ungrateful child," in German. Ungrateful. And that was a word which followed me for the 1.5 years in England. I was ungrateful. I behaved like an ungrateful baby. Yeah? And I remember to this day, and I'm sorry for my bad behavior, but probably that was my reaction to being separated from my normal life, from my parents. Some children cried, I never cried. And some people behaved like little monsters, and I belong to that.
You're very funny. Shulamit, did you start going to school?
Yes. And I've even got a report card. I was sent to a Jewish school, and I'll show you my report
Do you remember the
card.
name of the Jewish school?
It says on there, I don't remember.
And in which area was this?
Yeah, Golders Green.
So you were now in London?
Yes, we were, no, Rega, laat. It doesn't go so quickly. So the first station was this camp on the seashore. Then they took us from the camp on the seashore, they took us, I think it was an orphanage. I think it was an orphanage. And they told us that families would come and fetch us. And I don't know, but I think that I belonged to Rabbi Schoenfeld's group because I landed up with a Jewish family who kept kosher. And so I think I must have belonged to Rabbi Schoenfeld's group.
And did you go together with your sister?
No, my sister went to another family who were befriended with my family. So the two families met, we saw each other. I was very lucky, I was spoiled rotten because they had only 2 boys and they wanted a nice little girl, which I wasn't. And my sister arrived at the family where there were 3 girls. She was the 4th, and while she was there, another girl was born. So they needed her like a lochenko. And you can't blame them. She stayed in contact with them. 3 of the daughters arrived in Israel, made Aliyah, and my sister was in contact with them, I think almost till the day she died.
And were you in contact with the family that you stayed with?
Yes, for many years. I wrote to them, they wrote to me, and then at a certain point I lost contact. I think what happened was that the parents died and the children they never wrote to me. The one who wrote to me was Auntie Addie, the mother of the family. She wrote to me, I wrote to her, and we kept in contact for many years.
And Shulamit, did you ever see Rabbi Schoenfeld? Do you remember meeting him?
No. Don't remember him. I heard of Rabbi Schoenfeld. I'm reconstructing the story of when I met his niece here in Kiryat Ono, who passed away 2 or 3 years ago.
And how did your parents reunite?
How did they get out? Well, it was much easier if you don't have 2 small children with you. It was much easier to move around. And as I said, my father was well connected with the Jewish and Israeli, not Israeli, Palestinian groups. And he was the first to go out because he was signed. People knew about him. So he had to get out as fast as possible. And he came out and he came to Israel. And in Israel, his professor from the Vienna University was already here. And they took him in.
So this was when we're still under British...
under British mandate, of course.
So he came from Austria to like mandate-free Palestine?
Yes.
In
30, at the beginning of 39. At the beginning of 39. And then, in August 39, the Jews decided to have a Zionist Congress in Geneva. August 39. Good spät, as you say. Yeah? And my father was sent as a delegate from here to that Congress. And the plan was, he had a certificate, he had a laissez-passer for us. He'd arranged all the necessary papers, and the plan was that he'd participate in the Congress, and from the Congress he'd go to London to pick us up and bring us home. And this is what he did. After the Congress, he came to England, and next day war broke out. War broke out, and we were all stuck. My mother was here already.
Your mother she had come?
Yes, she had come after my father by herself with a lift. Very important to take the lift, and and father's desk. He had a desk as big as this dining room table, and his library. It was very important to pack it all.
And they managed to take this in 39? It's unbelievable.
Yes, because in 39, Eichmann was in Vienna. And his mission was to help the Jews leave as fast as possible, as many as possible, leaving all their belongings. Mm-hmm. Or most of their belongings in Vienna, to be confiscated. So at that time nobody talked about the final solution or things like that. It was to get rid of the Jews. They should go. God knows where, but they should go. Mm-hmm. And at that time the problem was that nobody wanted to take them in. Not that they were not allowed to leave. They were allowed to leave, but they couldn't. Do you remember the story about the St. Louis?
Sure, and that it sailed back, it had sailed back.
Yeah. So
America wouldn't allow it to dock.
No, and they all came back and were finished off.
There was a small percentage that went to England, a quarter, that they survived.
Very small.
And the rest, actually, many from the St. Louis actually were sent to the camps.
Can we put this off for a moment? אברהם, בוא תצטרף.
לא רציתי להפריע. I don't want to disturb.
Okay, just a few minutes.
בוא, אנחנו סגרנו.
And what happened when your mother came to see you?
No, my mother didn't come to see us. And this is Avram. And my story is not...
Avram, so good to see. So
הוא מדבר עברית מצוין, שלא תחשוב.
Shulamit, how did you meet your parents? You saw your father?
My father came to England. And my mother was here. And by that time we already had an apartment in Jerusalem, in Rehov Aza. You know where Rehov Aza is?
Sure. Wow.
And I broke my arm on the ship, and my father wasn't, children were not for him. He was, I don't know how much you are involved with your children, but my father left the bringing up of children with my mother. And when he arrived with the two girls, he said, "Here are your daughters, take them. I don't want to see them anymore."
And when did you come to...
We arrived in the middle of 1940, during war.
During the war?
Yes, during the war. War was already on, and London was being bombed.
Wow.
And we left with a boat belonging to a shipyard called Orient Line. I still remember the name. Orient Line. Orient Line. It was a shipping company. And that was in 1940, in the middle of 1940.
And Shulamit, how was your reunion with your mother when you saw her? You hadn't seen her for...
It was, as you can imagine, it was wonderful to be embraced by mother again, and a lot of emotion. And then we settled in, and it was 1940. Middle of 1940, and I went to a school in Jerusalem where the language of instruction was English, because my father thought that the children will learn Hebrew in any case, but at the beginning they've just managed to learn a new language, English, because of course when we arrived in England neither of us spoke a word of English. So we just had mastered a new language, and now let them have a few years of learning in the language they know, and they'll pick up the Hebrew as they go along, which we did.
And Shulamit, can I ask, what happened to the remainder of your family in Austria?
My mother had 2 siblings. They were both married and had children. My uncle went to England at the beginning, before the war, at the end of 38, more or less at the time when I was there. But like in this story, he didn't pick us up. He was there, but he was so involved with his problems and his family problem, he didn't take us from our foster parents' home.
And did you meet him? Did he come and visit?
No, we didn't see him. He was somewhere else. No.
He didn't come and visit you?
No, we met in Israel. And my aunt, she'd already, where did she go? Max?
They were in Prague.
They started off in Prague, and they also came to England.
Who, Max?
Max. Ronnie was born in England.
In England, yeah, sure.
So he came to England at a certain point. And Max is the husband of my aunt.
Did you have any family members that actually were sent to
No.
any of the camps?
None of them were there. They'd all left in
So
time.
thank God they left. Thank God.
Yes, they all left in time.
And have you ever been back to Vienna?
Yes, because my mother had property there. She had 3 apartment houses which were divided among the 3 children. And there was a caretaker for the property, and at a certain point, I think about 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we sold the property and divided the money among the...
And do you remember which district you lived in?
Yes. In the 9th Bezirk. In the 9th, how do you call it?
District. It's
District, 9th District. Lichtensteinstraße.
And Shulamit, I just have to ask you, do you remember the shuls? I know you were only 6 years old, but do you remember seeing the shuls before they were destroyed in Kristallnacht?
I remember Kristallnacht.
You remember it?
Yes, I remember Kristallnacht, but in our street, there were no shuls in the street itself. So I didn't. I saw and heard mostly what was going on, and I saw the fires, but from further away.
And did you understand it at such a young age what was going on? Why?
Not exactly. I didn't understand who was against whom. But I'd already seen the Jews being molested and beaten on the streets. That I saw regularly during daytime. But on Crystal Night, I remember, I think it was Mother who later told me, do you remember that night? That was Crystal Night. Yeah. And our parents didn't talk much. And we fools didn't ask. I think they wanted us children to have...
Maybe they wanted to protect.
Yes, want to have a new life, no memories of the old life.
And in Yerushalayim, in Rehov Aza, did you mix with other Austrian Jews?
No. There weren't any Austrian Jews in Rehov Aza.
But in Jerusalem, growing up?
No.
Your parents' friends?
My father's friends, my mother was a stay-at-home. And she never managed to learn the language properly. She was a teacher in Vienna, but she never managed to, she couldn't work as a teacher in Israel because her Hebrew wasn't good enough. And she used to take in children and take care of them, small children. That's how she helped the family finances. And my father was very busy in building a Medina.
What did he do when he came here?
He was involved in the Mizrahi. There was a party called Mizrahi, not Poala Mizrahi, but Mizrahi, and they were middle-class religious Jews. But they were not ultra-religious, and they were not Poalim. They were not a labor party, but they were middle class.
And was he close with Dr. Berg?
Yes, he was close. Dr. Berg was one of his friends, and Chaim Moshe Shapira. We used to visit. That's all the time. You know about Chaim Moshe Shapira. And Wahrhaftig and Gottesdiener.
You remember Wahrhaftig?
Yes, and Gottesdiener, and what else? Maya Shma Shel Gitale? Genachowski. There was a whole line of, those were his personal friends, and he was very much involved. He died in 1948.
Did he die after the state was established?
During the siege on Jerusalem.
Wow.
He died during the siege of Jerusalem.
How did he die?
He had cancer, and nobody treated cancer at that time. Only war wounded. I was 16 years old at the time, and he wasn't treated.
And did your mother remarry?
No, she never remarried. She went to Bikur Cholim. Does Bikur Cholim still exist?
Yeah, it's still there.
Is it functioning as a hospital?
It's more maternity.
So she worked in Bikur Cholim as the Menahelet Meshek. How do you say? Menahelet Meshek. She was in charge of the cleaning women and the kitchens and.
Wow, and Shulamit, what message could you tell to the future generation? You went through so much. You saw leaving your home, going on the Kindertransport.
I was very lucky. I was very lucky, and people should be grateful for what they get. And only when I became an adult did I realize how good people were to me in England during the time, and what a wonderful job all those involved with the Kindertransport did at the time. And they are all heroes.
And especially Rabbi Schoenfeld.
whom I didn't know at the time. אתה יודע שרבי שיינפלד הוא הדוד של ריי שינדלר.
כן, כן.
כן?
And Shulamit, I need to ask you, you only appreciated your parents' decision to let you go, you and your sister, much later on in life?
Yes. Not much later, but later. Later. At the time, I didn't think they were saving my life, which they were.
Okay, and I'm just going to ask you a difficult question. Have you gone to reunions of other Kindertransport, or are you in touch with other Kindertransport?
I don't know anybody. There was one man who went. I'm a physical therapist. I'm a physiotherapist, and I went to physiotherapy school, and there I met Amos. His name was Thomas Engel. And after we'd been together for 2 years, we suddenly discovered that he was on the Kindertransport. Wow. And he came from Prague. Now, in Prague, if I'm not mistaken, it was Nicholas Winton.
Yeah, he was very involved.
Yeah. So he also knew very little. His parents came to England. He was adopted by a Welsh priest. And we met in physical therapy school. Took us 2 years to pick up the pieces.
And
that's the only one whom I know.
And your gratitude to England for allowing the children to come on the Kindertransport?
Well, I think they did they could have done more, of course.
And the Jewish community in England
itself? The Jewish community, I think they did a wonderful job. Mm-hmm. Because they had no experience in transferring thousands of children. Yeah. You have to, it wasn't their job.
That's true.
Yeah? They were pushed into a position and they did what had to be done. And they did it very well, and many, many children were saved. And I even was spoiled and loved and cherished, which not many children had the luck to be.
It's so true. Shulamit, I just want to thank you. It's been such, I'm just, for 1 second, I really want to thank you so much.
But I didn't tell you much. I was there only 1.5 years. Wow.
Shulamit, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an honor and a privilege to hear you.
Thank you very much.
Just have mazel bracha, ad mevesrim, in good health. And
thank you.
Thank you for sharing your amazing story. Really,
you.
It is such a privilege to be here. Really.
Toda rabba.
What makes you interested in Kindertransport?
I can introduce you to quite a few. It's very interesting, the whole story. It's unbelievable. It's a major part of. Yeah.